great prosperity in the port of New York. Others, the Germans, from the many kingdoms of the Germanies, proving to be our most industrious farmers. In fact, as we meet here this day, the predominant population in the new Commonwealth of Pennsylvania remains German. Many others, amongst them whom?
Scotch-Irish?
Scotch-Irish,
Yeah.
they would never want to be thought of as British, would they?
Oh, no.
Any more than the Irish themselves or the Scots alone, and yet many others. Let the mortal enemy of England. Here before the English, claiming a great deal of this continent as their own. And lest we forget the Spaniards. Do you know the British have always been so proud of their first permanent English settlement in North America? But a few miles down the road, right down to Jamestown Island, 1607, I hope you well know that 50 years before that, the Spaniards built a fort on the York River. I declare, is that a Nightingale? I did not know they were indigenous to Virginia. That's right. Actually, extraordinary.
Sorry.
The Spaniards, we know as well, many from the kingdoms of the Italies. We know the Hebrews seeking a new promised land, and citizens who would ever be so bold to deny the African. Well, we know the majority were brought here against their will, but who would be so bold to deny the fact they had been settled here from the earliest days, had they not? With everybody else, and long before the greater numbers had even arrived. And therefore, as I have frequently said, lest we forget, though we were governed by the British monarchy 3,000 miles removed, we were becoming the less and less British, and the more and more
American.
Self-evident, is it not? A new breed, the likes of which the world has never seen before. A composition of so many people seeking an asylum, as perhaps some of you have read, as I have written as well. Shall oppressed humanity find no asylum on this globe? We are that asylum. We have always been that asylum. And by whose providence? Gaze about you, my fellow Americans, you will see a greater representation of the family of man than perhaps any nation upon this globe may boast, continuing to increase our numbers one generation after another. That is what is represented in our Declaration of American Independence, the asylum for oppressed humanity to be able to pursue hope, the betterment of their condition. That each and every soul is entitled unto inherent rights under the laws of nature and nature's God. Rights that are given to each and every soul, not by any government, not by any ruler. These rights are given by nature and nature's God. And thereby, citizens, thirdly, of my reflections upon our declaration in the events of late spring in '76, do you know, as the author of our declaration, I have frequently purported there is not one new or original thought within it. Not one. In fact, I frequently said I never came up with one new or original thought. Frequently I made that remark. Everything in our declaration has already been written. It has already been argued, it has already been debated, and you may find it in the elementary books of public right. The works of Aristotle, Cicero, Algernon Sidney, John Locke, and another that I shall mention in a moment. What we did was simply free the lofty sophisms of these ancient authors, place it in clear and simple terms, as I said earlier. And for those who cannot read, the recognition that our declaration has been written in order to be read. It follows a dramatic cadence. It lifts the human spirit to noble sentiments. That is the purpose of our declaration, to realize the nobility of the spirit of man on behalf of the happiness of his fellow man. Aristotle wrote thousands of years ago, yes, man is capable of self-government, but it must begin with whom? Self-government must begin with whom?
Individuals.
The individual, absolutely right. The individual is the success. He is the keystone, or she the keystone, of self-government. You know, he wrote thousands of years ago, if an individual shows they are incapable of governing themselves, then what makes them capable of governing others? A degree of common sense. We know this much: if men were angels, governments would not be necessary, would they? But I ask you, did we find angels in the forms of kings to govern us?
No.
Well, then let history answer this question. Here is our opportunity, each and every soul. Oh, it is certainly not without contradictions. I will not deny that. But here is the opportunity. And here is where we continue that timeless struggle for liberty and freedom throughout the family of man. Cicero said, for a people to be capable of governing themselves, they must never forget their history. Imagine, he wrote that thousands of years ago about the history 1,000 years before his time. He said that just as an individual should not forget their own personal history, and how viable that is. Why? Simply that we might not make the same mistakes we made in their past. Cicero said it is incumbent upon the citizen body not to forget their history, for he said if they do, they will remain school children all their lives, ready to be led rather than to lead themselves. Algernon Sidney, of course, most effective century before I was born, was a great defender of newspapers. How blessed we are as a nation of many, many newspapers, and who should know better than I'm the victim of most of them. But I assure you this, were it left to me to decide whether we should have this nation with a government and no newspapers, or have this nation with newspapers and no government, I would not hesitate a moment but to accept the latter. After all, who must know? You. Who must ultimately make up their minds? You. Who must ultimately decide what is printed in a newspaper, one or the other, is the truth or is fiction? You must be the one to decide. Who would ever satisfy themselves with one particular opinion in one newspaper without acquainting themselves with the contrary opinion in another newspaper, then to decide for themselves which is fact, which is the truth, and move accordingly, not only for your benefit, but lest you forget the benefit of your fellow man. No, I think Algernon Sidney, more than anyone else, helped us to understand the power, the enlightenment behind what I call the most precious invention of the modern world. Do you know what it is? The most precious invention of the modern world. The printing press. That information and facts may be disseminated to the greatest extent, and that the individual may now begin to read and think for themselves. To begin to understand knowledge is an inherent right, that it must no longer be locked up in the towers of monarchy, the towers of government, or the towers of the church. And lastly, Mr. Locke, John Locke, you know, I've never gotten over the fact he was an Englishman who provoked the American Revolution. Well, it was Mr. Locke more than any other author that I can think of. And his essays on government, his essay on human understanding, his general premise that no government anywhere at any time long survives without recognizing it receives its just rights to govern from home. You, the people, understood by a school child, indeed, free of any lofty sophisms, if there were no people, then a government would govern over whom? Nobody. It is the people, we the people, that not only provide the purpose, we provide the power for our government. And it follows, if we decide to be indifferent to our government, we are simply allowing the opportunity for our government to become indifferent to us. If we remain silent, then that silence will feed our government power, fatten our government to become as a wolf. And how well we know it is with common sense, a wolf well fed will not lie back lazy, will it? Well, indeed, will immediately turn down to bite the hand that is fed. I mentioned one other, thus far unnamed, and that is someone whose great work appeared that same year that we drafted our Declaration. Now, little by little, he is becoming known, particularly gentlemen who are able to read extensively some books of lofty premise and philosophy. But I think in time his general premises will be disseminated generally throughout the family of man. He is a Scot. His name is Smith. He had been working on a study for many, many years about the wealth of nations, and he has published just that in his tome entitled simply The Wealth of Nations.